Journey IFC strives to create safe spaces to worship God. Know that you are welcome just as you are, regardless of religious background or lack thereof, skin color, political affiliation, sexuality, age, culture, or any other label you own or society throws on you. You are welcomed and celebrated here just as you are.
Our reading today comes from the book of Genesis. This is a story about Joseph and his 11 brothers who were reunited due to a drought. When Joseph could no longer control himself, before all those who stood by him, he cried out, "Send everyone away from me." So no one stayed with him when Joseph made himself known to his brothers. And he wept so loudly that the Egyptians heard it, and the household of Pharaoh heard it. Joseph said to his brothers, "I am Joseph. Is my father still alive?" But his brothers could not answer him, so dismayed were they at his presence. Then Joseph said to his brothers, "Come closer to me." And they came closer. He said, "I am your brother, Joseph, whom you sold into Egypt. And now do not be distressed or angry with yourselves because you sold me here, for God sent me before you to preserve life. For the famine has been in the land for 2 years, and there are 5 more years in which there will be neither plowing nor harvest. God sent me before you to preserve for you a remnant on earth, and to keep alive for you in many survivors. So it was not you who sent me here, but God. He has made me a father to Pharaoh, and lord of all his house, and ruler over all the land of Egypt. Hurry and go up to my father and say to him, 'Thus says your son Joseph, God has made me lord of all Egypt. Come down to me. Do not delay. I will provide for you, since there are 5 more years of famine to come, so that you and your household and all that you have will not come to poverty. And now your eyes and the eyes of the brother Benjamin see that it is my mouth that speaks to you. You must tell my father how greatly I am honored in Egypt and all that you have seen. Hurry and bring my father down here." Then he fell upon his brother Benjamin's neck, and he wept, while Benjamin wept upon his neck. And he kissed all his brothers, and he wept upon them. And after that, his brothers talked with him. That is the reading.
So like I said, the past 2 weeks we talked about 2 of what they're called the patriarchs, or the fathers of the Hebrew Bible. So first we had Abram, who became Abraham, and then we had his son Isaac. We heard about their scenario with saying that their wives were their sisters, all that stuff. And we saw these repeating patterns of harmful behavior and deception and lying, and we saw how these familial patterns can be passed down from one generation to the next, and how they continue to be passed down until someone does the hard work of rewriting these scripts. But this week we're going to keep the trend going, and we're going to look at this same family. And so we had Abraham, who had Isaac, and then Isaac had 2 sons, Esau and Jacob, and then we have Jacob, who had a lot of sons. He had 12 sons, to be exact. And we're told that this grandson of Abraham, named Jacob, who will also go by Israel after he wrestles with God, and that's the whole thing. We'll call him Jacob today, just to make it simple. But we're told that Jacob holds the same blessings that Abraham was given, that he was promised early on, that his descendants would outnumber the stars, and from them would come blessings for all the world, all families, the entire world would be blessed through their descendants. And it seems that Jacob took this very seriously and started having a lot of kids. He was like, okay, we're going to have descendants outnumber the stars, let's start working on it now. So they had a lot of kids, and at the first part of this story that begins today, there's only 11 sons, so just 11 only. And there's 10 of them, they're the regular old sons, they're not that great. But there's one that's this like star-studded son. He's the best. He's Jacob's favorite by far. He's the youngest of all of them. And he also has these cool prophetic dream abilities, which means he's blessed by God in some way. And his name is Joseph. And Joseph gets special treatment from his father, and he even gets this fancy coat, this coat of many colors. You may have heard that before. And all of his 10 brothers absolutely despise him. They cannot stand this guy. He's the suck-up, he's the one, the teacher's pet, all whatever you want to call him. That's what he is. And they hate him so much, in fact, they make a plan to kill their brother one day. So what they do is they decide to throw Joseph into a pit, and they're just going to leave him there to die. They even take that special coat off of him, and they cover it in blood of an animal, so that when they take it back to their father, they can say, oh, he was killed, and then they get away, they didn't have to do anything. They just had to take this coat, throw him in a pit, and hope the best happened. And so they go and tell their father, and Jacob buys the scheme. He believes them, and he just mourns greatly because his favorite son, this most beloved son, has died. But one of the brothers goes back. His name is Reuben, and he wants to check, and he wants to see if Joseph is still there in that pit. Maybe he wants to help, I'm not sure. But whenever he gets there, he notices that the pit is empty, and we're told in the story that Joseph was actually taken and turned into a slave, and he was actually having to serve one of the Pharaoh's top guys named Potiphar, and so he's taken into this house to be a slave. So the brothers get away with murder, and Joseph is now in servitude, and we think it would all be terrible at this point, but really it's not all that bad for Joseph. He ends up being really good at whatever he has to do for Potiphar, and he kind of works his way up in rank, and God blesses him with more than just these prophetic dreams. He also makes him a really good worker, and so he works his way up, and he's eventually placed in charge of the entire house of Potiphar. And so he becomes the top guy there. He's like the top-notch dude. So he goes from being in a pit to now being in charge of this house. And so it's not that bad, right? It's like, okay, he made it out. But then this weird thing happens where Potiphar's wife accuses him of trying to have an affair, and it doesn't happen, or does it not? It doesn't matter. Joseph is thrown into prison. So it was like, oh, he finally escaped. He's okay. Well, not for long. He's now in prison, right? So we think, well, dang, that sucks for him. And it does, but only for a bit. It seems that he always has this kind of round of luck that comes in, and even in this prison, Joseph is blessed by God, and he continues to move up in rank. If there's ranks in prison, I guess, I don't know. But it seems that he becomes almost like a prison chaplain. He's set to care for other prisoners that come in. And I think that's really cool, that he gets there and he gets to know everyone, he gets to know the guards, and they send the new people to him to be cared for. And so at one point, Joseph, he's caring for 2 people, and he predicts their dreams. He says, let me hear your dreams, they're weird, and one of them is going to die, one is going to live, and he's like, I'll interpret these, and if I'm right, tell the Pharaoh so I can be freed. And they're like, okay, yeah, that sounds like a good plan, but the problem is one of them was told he's going to die, and he dies, so he can't tell the Pharaoh, and then the other one simply forgets to tell the Pharaoh, and he just slips his mind that this other guy helped him get out of prison. And so then 2 years go by. That's 2 years is what it says, not just a little bit. 2 years go by, and Joseph still remains in this prison. But one night, the Pharaoh is having these weird dreams that are troubling him, and he can't understand what the dreams are trying to tell him, and he's asking all around Egypt, but no one seems to know what it's about. And this is where that prisoner, the former prisoner who Joseph helped, is like, oh, I did make a promise a couple of years back that I'd help this guy out. He's like, oh yeah, right, Pharaoh. There's this dude named Joseph who interpreted my dreams, and he was right, and he may be able to help you out. So the Pharaoh calls in Joseph, hoping that he can help him figure out this dream, and he tells them about them. And Joseph interprets them, saying that this dream means that Egypt will experience 7 years of abundance in crops. There's just going to be blessings upon blessings. But then the second half of both your dreams means that there'll be 7 years of famine. So Joseph says that Egypt should begin to prepare for this by storing away in the years that they have plenty, so that when they get to the famine, they'll have enough to feed everyone. And they do that, and they're successful, and they have more than enough. And the Pharaoh is so impressed by Joseph that he makes him second in command. So he went from the pit, right? And where his brothers were trying to kill him. We remember that. Then he gets enslaved, works his way up there. Then he gets sent to prison, works his way up there, and then he gets freed, and now he's working his way up. And the only person that's over him is the Pharaoh. Everyone else has to listen to him. What a weird turn of fate for Joseph, right? And all these years later, Joseph has obtained this great deal of power despite the pain his brothers caused him early on in his life. I think he was 17 when they did that, and he is now about in his 30s. But as Joseph predicted, Egypt experiences this 7 years of plenty, and they store away all of these goods, and then this drastic famine hits, and kind of like the drought we've been talking about and experiencing, it hits and everyone's just wiped out. But Joseph now becomes the one who is divvying out all of the resources to those who need. So he's the one in Egypt that people go to when they need food. And so if we remember back to Abram's story, he goes to Egypt and tries to get help, and then he lies about his wife being his sister. And then Isaac, he's sent to another place, he does the same thing. Now Joseph, their grandson, is the one who's doing this for other people. See how these stories are this kind of continuing pattern. It's like when you read Genesis, it's like, we get it, we understand, there's a famine, it's happening. It's a cyclical thing that goes over and over and over. The famine becomes so bad throughout the land that Jacob, and with all of his sons back at home, he tells his sons to go to the Pharaoh and ask for some food. And so now we learn that there's also a 12th son. And this is the new son, Benjamin, who is the new favorite. He must have just really liked the younger ones. I don't know what it was. But what happens is all the sons pack up and head to Egypt so they can get some help, some food in this famine. But Jacob stays behind with his youngest son, Benjamin. He's scared of losing him because he's already lost one son before. So he tries to protect him at all costs. And so they're just going to stay back while all the other sons go ahead. When the brothers get to Egypt, they are met by their brother Joseph, who now goes by this fancy new name that's Egyptian, and he wears fancy clothes, even fancier than that robe that his dad gave him, and he talks in a different language and even uses a translator to talk to them. This man that they had left for dead and had sold into slavery is seated in power before them, and they can't even recognize him as their brother. But Joseph knows who they are. And so Joseph asks them questions about their family and their brothers and about his father that he misses. He also asks about their need for food, all of that, of course. And Joseph learns that he has a younger brother and that his beloved father is still alive, and this gives him hope. This makes him excited. And in these conversations, the brothers somehow admit that they had another brother that no longer is with them, and he's gone because of fault of their own, and it seems that they're a little bit remorseful for what they have done to Joseph. And they're saying this all to him without even realizing that it's him. Several times throughout this encounter, Joseph has to excuse himself from the scene. He has to go into a back room because he just gets so overwhelmed with emotion that he has to go and cry alone. And I was like, that's relatable. That feels very human of him. That he sees his family and is so overcome that he has to leave and cry. His brothers who sent him away are now standing in front of him, clueless of his identity, and they're asking him for help. Again, that twist in fate, right? But Joseph regathers himself, and then he starts doing something which only a brother can do. He starts kind of messing with his brothers, kind of like picking on him. He's probably getting back. He's getting a little bit of revenge here, I think. And so he tells them that, y'all are all spies. Yeah, that's why you're here. You're trying to spy on us. You're not here to get food. And so he throws them in prison for 3 days, which probably a bit of payback for all the enslavement and imprisonment he had faced himself. He was maybe a little bit bitter here. And he tells them that to prove that they're not spies, they must go and get their younger brother, because they're probably lying about him. All of this is just, so he can meet his younger brother. To do this, they have to leave behind one brother, though. So he says, if y'all go get your youngest brother, I'll believe you're not spies, but you have to leave one imprisoned here. And so they do that. They leave one behind. They all return home, and then they bring back their youngest brother. And so one of the brothers is thrown into prison, and all the others are back, and they are sent with food, and they have resources and that they paid for. They gave money to Pharaoh, and they leave. But when they get home, they open up the bags of food, and they realize that oh no, all the money that we were supposed to give to them is still in our bags. What now? They panic and worry that what they've done will get them killed, this big mistake, and they know how angry that man was before that they were trying to get food from. They threw them in prison. They're just terrified because they somehow ended up with the money. Little did they know, it was all part of Joseph's plan, and he was just picking on them a little bit more. Their father Jacob says, okay, we'll take my youngest son and go back. But he doesn't say this with a lot of gusto. He's really hesitant because he's worried what will happen. But he said, if this will satisfy him and get my other son back that's in prison, just go, take him and give him and show him to this man and please just bring him home. So the brothers return, and they bring the money that they had in their bags, but they also bring a double amount of money because they want to buy resources and they want to give the money back. They want to make up for what has happened, this mistake. But they also bring their young brother Benjamin in tow. And they come back and they give this money back, and they're like, we're sorry, we don't know what happened. We don't know why we did this. We thought we gave you the money. And Joseph says, no, this must be a mistake. We were paid. That just been a blessing from God, I guess, that y'all ended up with that. We got the money. You're okay. There's a bit of grace there, which is really sweet. He's not that mean to his brothers, even though he probably could have been a little meaner. When Joseph returns, he frees the other brothers from their prison. This is after he's gone and had another cry himself. He likes to cry, but he goes and cries, and he comes back and he frees the brother that's been in prison and reunites all the other brothers. And then he sends them back to the family again with all of the resources. But he has one more trick up his sleeve. So it's a lot of this back and forth. And so as they're leaving, he tells one of his people, put like one of our fancy cups in the bag of the youngest one. And then you're going to go and arrest him. Okay? And so that's what they do. They send him on their way, and then the guards come and get him, and they see that he has this cup in this bag, and they take him back, and they're so worried that, oh no, they're going to be thrown in prison. The favorite son is now being killed. This has happened before. But when they get back, Joseph finally drops the facade. And he looks at them, and this is what we read today. He tells them that he is their long-lost brother. Joseph then explains about his life and everything that's happened to get him where he's at. And he says that what they have done to him actually turned out okay in the end. And then the brothers embrace one another in hugs, and they kiss each other and cry together. And I can only imagine this great deal of guilt and anger and sorrow and all of those emotions mixed up in this one moment. But in this moment, a family is reunited. But it makes me wonder, can the relationship ever be fully repaired after what they've done? Because when we look at the story, it's quite a saga. They've has all this traveling back and forth, this lying and deception. It has success despite all these adverse conditions. It has tears and reunion of estranged family members. It's a fascinating story about growth and guilt. But I'd like to say it's also a story about forgiveness. Because at the beginning of the story, Joseph's brothers thought there was not enough. They thought that there wasn't enough resources, there wasn't enough, inheritance from their father, there wasn't enough food, there also wasn't enough love from their father. And it seemed that Joseph was the one that represented all that they didn't have. He was the one that was getting more than he deserved. So what they did is they took matters into their own hands, and they found a way to make sure that they had enough, even if that meant killing off their brother. But God's blessings of protection that he promised to Abraham and then to Isaac seem to keep following this dysfunctional family. Despite them doing all these awful things to one another, they still are blessed by God for some reason or another. And Joseph seems to be the greatest recipient of these blessings in this story, as his gifts from God keep him alive and thriving through all of these crazy life circumstances, prison, enslavement, all of it. Joseph is left for dead and ends up being in charge of the royal palace. And he even gets to control all of the resources in the middle of a famine, which is crazy to think back to the Abraham story and the Isaac story when they had nothing and now their descendant is over all of the resources. When the famine strikes, we see that the ones who were once in control are now having to rely on the mercy of the one whom they caused to suffer so greatly in the first place. This kingdom inversion that we've kind of talked about these couple of weeks has happened again. The first is last, the least is the greatest. And it's interesting. How does Joseph respond? Does he respond with revenge and hate? Kind of, a little bit of revenge. Not a lot of hate. There's a little bit of grace. There is some revenge. But it seems that this time apart from his family has been long enough for him and his brothers' hearts to change somehow. It seems that time can change the hearts of even the most stubborn of people, like his brothers. And it also seems that time can heal the hearts of even the most hurt people, like Joseph. So what do we do with this story? Does it tell us to simply forgive those who have hurt us? I don't know if it says that. Or does it challenge us to be kinder to our siblings? Maybe I'm talking to my siblings there. Maybe. Or maybe it's telling us don't have a favorite child. Maybe that would settle things. I don't know. I'm not sure. But what strikes me about this story is when Joseph stands before his brothers and hears the sorrow in their voices, and he hears that they really feel bad for what they've done, and then he's broken open. It's as if the story he had been telling himself about his brothers all along has suddenly been rewritten. It has a different ending than he thought it always had. They came to him and needed him after sending him away to die. But it also seems that the story the brothers had been telling themselves about their brother Joseph was rewritten as well. Their dead brother was now the successful Egyptian leader who was showing them grace, even though they didn't deserve it. Last week I talked of family systems and the need for these small changes to repair these issues in these family systems, and how everyone in the family gets a new role, and yada yada yada. Watch last week's video if you forgot that. But as I talked with my counselor this past week, he reminded me that family systems work can also be turned inward. It doesn't always have to happen with the full family. Sometimes it can happen within ourselves. And in doing so, we can begin to heal parts of ourselves that other people hurt, even if they're not present. We can become the healing force in our own lives when we learn to care for ourselves and process our own crap that we deal with. We don't even need our families to be in on it to do this work. We can make these profound changes in our own lives with just these small little tweaks. So as I sit with the story of Joseph, I wonder how much work it took for Joseph to get to a place where he could genuinely forgive his brothers for the pain they had caused him. And note, it doesn't happen exactly. He doesn't say, I forgive you in this. There's another chapter, a couple of chapters later where he does it, but it doesn't happen in this first moment. It takes some time. It takes some internal care and some personal work, and it probably took all those years of being enslaved and in prison for Joseph to work through this himself. But when Joseph sees his family, he's faced with a lot of challenging decisions. And we too may have faced similar challenging decisions, like, should we really forgive one another? Are there people in our lives that we cannot forgive? And I'll tell you that Joseph's story is not a prescription telling us how to respond. It's not saying this is the only correct way. The story is simply just one option that we have to choose or not to choose. But no, for Joseph to forgive and for his brothers to forgive themselves, it wasn't just a simple forgiveness. It took a lot of grace and work and acknowledgement of the harm caused to get them through this. It took many years and all of this time apart, and it may take the same for us to do this as well. But in all of it, we get the choice of how we respond. We get to choose to be a source of healing and forgiveness in the world if we want to. And sometimes that means healing a broken family, but sometimes it also just means healing a broken self. But something magical happens in moments like this one, where Joseph and his brothers shared this moment when they embraced one another and were brought to tears. That is magic right there. May we find places in our lives this week, this year, this season, whatever we're in, where we can experience this magical experience of grace and forgiveness. May we find ways to grant this grace to others as well. Amen.
The question before everyone. always is why. The most asked question in all the world is why? Well, maybe for this it was why. But Joseph never asked why, did he? Joseph persevered. He knew the grace that God had showered on him, not knowing why or what was going to happen. So look at it this way. Don't get in the way with why. Let it happen. Let things unfold as God has had them unfold. Because there is a bigger plan. And the good news is that even if we do it wrong and miss that joy that God has planned for us, God never lets go of our hand. Go in peace. Amen.